Greetings, my fellow denizens of the 41st millennium, and welcome back to the channel. We've walked before among the towering forms of the Chaos Knights. We've gazed upon the fire-streaked silhouettes of the traitor titans, their armour scarred by centuries of war and sorcery, and yet these giants are but the heralds of a deeper, darker force. A force that twists knowledge into corruption, logic into heresy, and metal into abomination. It's fitting then that today we will delve into the hidden forges and twisted minds of the Dark Mechanicum. The Dark Mechanicum is not merely a military threat, it is the embodiment of heretic ambition, the corruption of faith, and the ultimate perversion of the machine god's sacred will. So let us descend into Mars and follow the smoke of the first infernal forges, for this is where the shadow of damnation begins. Long before the fires of the Horus Heresy scorched the stars, Mars stood as a beacon of devotion and innovation. The Adeptus Mechanicus, then the Mechanicum, servants of the machine god, had forged a civilization devoted entirely to the pursuit of knowledge. Not knowledge as the Imperium understands it, but the sacred mysteries of machine, logic, and spirit fused as one. Mars was a world of colossal forges, brimming with smoke, flame, and magnetic resonance. Here, in the vaulted halls of the temples of Mars, tech priests adorned in crimson robes chanted the litanies of the machine, invoking the sacred names of the Omnissiah as sparks flew from forge hammers and the smell of molten metal hung thick in the air. The Mechanicum was not uniform in thought, however. Even before the heresy, there were whispers of division. One faction believed the Emperor to be the living Omnissiah, a divine being walking among mortals as the earthly conduit of the machine god's will. Another faction remained faithful to ancient Martian teachings, convinced that the Omnissiah slumbered within the deep sanctums of the planet, waiting to awaken. These seeds of ideological fracture would one day grow into the gnarled roots of rebellion. Mars itself was a world alive with the rhythm of technology. Ancient standard template constructs, also known as STCs, long sealed away, were studied with reverence. Every engine, every cog, every line of binary computation was not simply mechanical, it was spiritual, sacred, and eternal. The tech priests of Mars did not merely build, they communed. Every servo, every lathe, every warp-forged circuit was a prayer, a liturgy in steel and flame. Yet even in these hallowed halls, shadows stirred. Some tech priests felt an itch, a longing, a hunger for knowledge forbidden. Not for the benefit of the Imperium, but for personal enlightenment. These were the minds susceptible to the whispered promises of Horus Lupercal, promises that would one day twist faith into heresy. Mars, with all its sacred forges, was not immune to the currents of galactic politics. As the Great Crusade unfolded, the Emperor's armies conquered world after world, bringing knowledge and often subjugation in equal measure. Mars provided engines of war, constructs of ingenuity, and the red-robed Magi marched with the Imperial fleets. Yet among them, doubt began to fester. It was said even then that the Emperor's gaze upon Mars was too calculating, too distant. He sought not only to command, but to control. Some whispered that he had coveted Martian secrets, that one day he might seize the STC data stored within the vaults, enslaving the tech priests in a master-slave bond of logic and flesh. Such whispers, though few, were seeds that Horus would later exploit with devastating precision. Now, I feel it important to state that Mars was not only a cradle of knowledge, but also a crucible of obsession. Every tech priest devoted their life to uncovering lost technologies from the dark age of technology, the era when humanity's machines were gods and men were the servants of their own creations. To study these relics was not mere curiosity, it was reverence, it was faith, and for some, it was temptation. It was in this fertile soil of faith, ambition, and suspicion that the Dark Mechanicum was conceived. They were born not with the roar of cannons or the fire of war, but in the quiet flicker of a forbidden forge, where the sparks danced like the eyes of demons and metal whispered secrets that no mortal should hear. The tech priests who would become the Dark Mechanicum began to experiment with machines in ways their loyal brethren could not. The fused flesh with circuitry invoked the warp into their engines and touched upon the secrets of demonology. It was subtle at first, whispered incantations, minor deviations in machine rites, but each step was a deliberate movement towards heresy. When Horus finally approached them, he did not demand obedience, he offered revelation. He offered knowledge unbound by the Emperor's dogma. He promised access to the STCs of the Horatian technocracy, to vaults sealed by millennia of Martian prudence, and the freedom to explore forbidden technologies without fear of sanction. And so, the first tech priests faltered, they stepped into shadow, and they became heretics. They became the first priests of what would one day be called the Dark Mechanicum. The stage was set. Mars had given birth to both faith and betrayal. The forges would not cease, the machine god would not slumber, and the universe would soon bear witness to the engines of damnation that these heretic priests would unleash. Now, we're going to continue essentially into detailing Horus's manipulation and the ideological rift and the seduction of the Mechanicum, moving towards eventually the schism of Mars. So, let's continue. The Dark Mechanicum did not rise in a vacuum. Its creation was the result of subtle manipulation, patient whispering, and the seduction of ambition. And there was no greater manipulator than Horus Lupercal, the Warmaster of the Imperium and once the favoured son of the Emperor of Mankind. As the Great Crusade neared its zenith, Horus had already begun to feel the seed of rebellion within his heart, nurtured by the whispers of the warp and promises from the dark gods themselves. He knew that to challenge the Emperor, he would require allies in the realms of knowledge, the architects of engines, weapons, and technologies the Imperium had never seen. Mars, with its towering spires and eternal forges, was the obvious prize. Its tech priests were brilliant, devout, and fiercely proud. Yet, the very pride that made them loyal also made them vulnerable to ambition. Horus approached them not with sword and fury, but with words that promised liberation. He did not demand allegiance from them, he offered vision. He promised access to forbidden technologies, vaults long sealed, and standard template constructs thought lost to the ages. The Emperor seeks to enslave you, Horus whispered through agents and emissaries. His voice carried across the hololithic channels of Mars. He pretends to be the Omnisire, but his intent is to strip you of your knowledge, your faith, your very purpose. Only by embracing the path of freedom can you truly serve the machine god. For some, these words were poison. For others, they were revelation. They spoke to fears long nurtured in Martian halls, the fear that the Emperor might seize their secrets, the fear that their devotion would one day be repaid with subjugation. Horus was patient. He waited, letting the seed take root in the fertile soil of pride and ambition. The Warmaster's promises were concrete. He revealed fragments of STC data from the Eurasian technocracy, knowledge lost for millennia, designs for energies and weapons that no loyal tech priest had dared to dream. He promised access to the vaults sealed beneath Mars, places where technology older than the Imperium itself slumbered, waiting to be awakened. Yet Horus's greatest weapon was not the promise of knowledge. It was the exploitation of belief. Mars was divided. Some still revered the Emperor as the Omnisire incarnate, a god among men whose vision for humanity was just and divine. Others clung to the ancient Martian dogma. The Omnisire did not walk among men, but slumbered on Mars itself, hidden in the depths, waiting for the time of awakening. Horus amplified this schism. His agents whispered that the Emperor's apparent divinity was a lie, a scheme designed to enslave Martian minds and bend them to his will. "Your faith is not yours," they said. "It has been stolen. The Omnisire has not come to you. The false Omnisire walks among you. Serve him and you are a tool. Serve the true Mechanicum and you are a master of fate." It was the perfect lie. Ambition, pride, and fear intertwined, creating fertile ground for rebellion. The first of the tech priests to waver did so quietly, studying forbidden texts and experimenting with heretic technology in secret. Small divinations in ritual, minor modifications to constructs, these were the first steps into shadow. The Dark Mechanicum's seduction was gradual, almost imperceptible. They began to explore technologies previously forbidden. Fusion of flesh and machine spirits infused with demon energies, and devices that interacted with the warp itself. At first, these were minor experiments, isolated deviations. But under Horus's guidance, these small steps became leaps into blasphemy. The tech priests who embraced these secrets were rewarded. Their machines performed beyond expectation, constructs moved with preternatural awareness, engines burned hotter, weapons struck with greater precision, and with each success, the whispers grew louder. "The Emperor fears you. The machine god calls you. Power is yours if you only reach for it." The agents of Horus also promised protection. If these priests just joined with the Warmaster's cause, he would shield them from imperial retribution, grant them access to the knowledge that the Emperor sought to deny them, and elevate them to heights previously unimaginable. Some began to see Horus not as a rebel or a heretic, but as a saviour, a liberator of Martian knowledge and faith. It was not temptation alone that drove them. Many were curious, ambitious, or frustrated by imperial oversight. Some had long suspected that the Emperor's focus on humanity neglected the deeper truths of the machine god. Horus gave them reason to act, reason and tools and justification. By the time Horus's plan had fully taken shape, entire sects of the Mechanicum had aligned themselves with the Warmaster. There were no longer mere tech priests, there were heretics, priests of a new order, an order that would become the Dark Mechanicum. These priests abandoned the red robes of Mars in favour of black vestments, adopting symbols of chaos alongside the traditional cog Mechanicum. Now twisted into an 8-pointed star with a skull at its centre, gifts of mutation, demonic blessings and mechanical augmentations followed swiftly. marking those who pledged themselves to the path of darkness. The promise of Horus was more than words, it was transformation. The tech priests' experiments with forbidden technologies intensified. Flesh and machine were fused in a blasphemous harmony. Constructs were imbued with the energies of the warp. Demonic engines roared to life. Mars, the sacred forge world of the Omnissiah, began its slow descent into shadow. The Dark Mechanicum had been born, not in the fires of war, but in the quiet, deliberate seduction of knowledge and ambition. And with their birth, the galaxy gained a force unlike any other. The masters of machines, wielding the warp itself as fuel, guided by ambition and bound to no law but their own perverted fate. The stage was set for the schism of Mars, the civil war that would pit brother against brother, forge against forge, and faith against faith. The forges of Mars would burn, and the universe would never be the same again. So now we will discuss the Schism of Mars, which is a very important, pivotal part of the history of both the Adeptus Mechanicus, then Mechanicum, and the Dark Mechanicum. Mars, the cradle of the machine god, the sacred forge world that has supplied the Imperium's might for centuries. Its skies had once burned with the promise of creation, the red sands of its surface glimmering with the sacred sparks of invention and worship. But now, those same forges whispered in tongues no loyal ear could hear. The air shimmered with static and heresy. The holy hymns of the Omnissiah corrupted into chants of blasphemy. The Schism of Mars, a civil war of ideology, faith, and machine, had begun. The seeds Horus had planted now bloomed into war. The Fabricator-General of Mars, Kelbor-Hal, once the highest servant of the machine god, had turned his back on terror. He was a man of impossible intellect and unshakable pride, and it was pride that Horus had so expertly poisoned. When the Warmaster's emissaries arrived with proof of the Emperor's betrayal, schematics, decrees, fragments of supposed imperial doctrine, Kelbor-Hal's faith faltered. To him, it was not rebellion, it was revelation. He declared that the Emperor of mankind was not the Omnissiah, but a false prophet, a usurper of divinity and a thief of truth. The true Omnissiah, Kelbor-Hal proclaimed, was yet to awaken, perhaps deep beneath the crusts of Mars, or in the hidden mechanisms of the universe itself. Under his new creed, the Dark Mechanicum was formally born. At first, it began with isolated uprisings. Forge cults seizing control of manufactorums, Skitarii forces refusing orders, priesthoods returning on their masters, the Red Planet split along lines of faith and logic, loyalists to the Emperor clashing with the disciples of Kelbor-Hal. Across the Noctis labyrinth, titanic engines of war, once symbols of unity and strength, were turned upon one another. Titans of the Legio Mortis, corrupted by demonic influence, strode across the dust plains to annihilate their once brother engines of Legio Ignatum, loyal to the Emperor. Each step of those colossal machines shattered the crust of Mars and echoed across the void of space. Fire and oil rained from the heavens, binary prayers devolved into screams, and in the catacombs beneath Olympus Mons, a new kind of horror stirred. Kelbor-Hal's disciples had begun their experiments in earnest. They no longer whispered of forbidden knowledge, they embraced it. They tore open the veil between matter and spirit, summoning entities of the warp to inhabit their constructs. Flesh was bound with metal, circuits pulsed with demonic essence. Thus were born the first Daemon Engines. Their forms were twisted, magnificent, and horrifying. Brass and bone interlocked, infernal energy pulsed like blood through tubing and circuitry. Their machine spirits were not bound by prayer, but by pact bargains, struck with beings that should never have been given form in reality. The loyal Mechanicum tried to exorcise these blasphemies, but their efforts were met with ruin. For every titan they brought down, 2 more rose, warped, shrieking, alive in a way that no machine should be. The schism consumed Mars entirely. The red planet burned. Loyalist forges became bastions, their priests chanting the canticles of the Omnissiah while bolting shut their own gates, praying to hold out against the tide. Kelbor-Hal's forces, the newborn Dark Mechanicum, swept across the surface with unrelenting fury. They unleashed armies of mutant servitors, the flesh grotesquely stretched over metallic frames, and legions of dark Skitarii, warriors whose bodies had been perfected through corruption. Their augmetics gleamed with demonic sigils. Their optics glowed with warp-born fire. They marched not to the rhythmic hymns of Mars, but to the discordant chants of chaos. In the skies above, hell talons and hellblades, demonic aircrafts forged in the earliest forges of the Dark Mechanicum, screeched through the thin Martian air, their engines screaming with an intelligence that was neither machine nor mortal. The void ships in orbit, once imperial, now corrupted, bombarded loyalist strongholds with weapons powered by warp energies, the refractors fed by bound demons. And amidst it all, Kelbor-Hal stood within the central forge temple of Olympus Mons, surrounded by arcane machinery and warp-charged conduits, this human form barely recognisable beneath layers of augmented steel and brass. He communed not with the Emperor, but with something else. Something vast. Something whispering through the static between stars. Under his command, the Dark Mechanicum began reshaping Mars itself. Factories became temples of blasphemy, machine gods of flesh and steel were constructed, living engines, conscious and malicious. The Loyalists fought with desperation, invoking ancient rites of protection and unleashing their purest titans, the warlords of Legio Tempestus, the warhounds of Legio Ignatum, in a final attempt to hold the Red World, but it was far too late. Horus's corruption had taken root too deeply. When the Warmaster finally declared open war against the Emperor, when the Horus Heresy began, Mars was already a world divided, half lost to darkness, half barely clinging to the light. The Dark Mechanicum under Kelbor-Hal openly declared for Horus. The loyal Mechanicum forces who survived were forced to flee, retreating to distant forge worlds across the Imperium, places like Riza and Lucius, to rebuild what they could. Mars itself, the very heart of the Mechanicum, was consumed. The great forge temples became shrines to chaos, the sacred hymns were rewritten into corrupted verses praising the union of demon and machine. The cog Mechanicum, once a symbol of divine logic, now bore 8 arrows, the mark of chaos, spreading outward from a grinning skull of iron. Kelbor-Hal, now fully a creature of metal and malevolence, proclaimed Mars reborn. A planet not of servitude, but of ascension. He called it the New Mechanicum, the true Mechanicum, free from the false doctrines of the Imperium. His priests followed him into damnation willingly, believing that in chaos they had found the next evolution of existence, the merging of the spiritual and the mechanical, the divine and the profane. They no longer denied the warp, they embraced it. To them, denying the warp was denying the fullness of the machine god's creation. Light and darkness, matter and spirit, all were parts of a grand, unknowable mechanism. And if the Imperium refused to acknowledge that truth, then the Imperium itself was flawed. And so, under banners of black and brass, the Dark Mechanicum pledged itself to Horus. The forges burned ceaselessly, producing weapons of unimaginable horror, hell-forged titans, demon engines, corrupted servitors, and the monstrous constructs that would accompany the traitor legions to war. Now, one of the most famous battles of the Horus Heresy is the Battle of Istvan V, and of course the famous drop site massacre that occurred there. And it was here on Istvan V where the Dark Mechanicum would see their handiwork unleashed upon loyalist forces for the first time. Machines whose screams were half mechanical, half human, whose armour plates shifted like living skin. They became indispensable to Horus's war effort, binding demons to tanks, walkers, and even ships. Each creation was both weapon and ritual, a sacrifice to the dark gods. And with every victory, the Dark Mechanicum fell deeper into damnation. But even the greatest engines of war could not save Horus from his fate. When the Warmaster fell, and the Siege of Terra ended in ruin, the surviving forces of chaos, including the Dark Mechanicum, fled into the Eye of Terror, pursued by the vengeance of the Imperium. There, within the endless storms of the warp, they found new worlds, hell forges, where the laws of reality bent and metal screamed as it was shaped. Zana too, and Saranor, and 1,000 others became their sanctuaries, places where the line between machinery and demon vanished entirely. From these infernal foundries, they continued their dark work, creating brass scorpions, defilers, and warp-powered titans that would one day march again against the Imperium. Their forges never cooled, their faith never wavered, for to them, they were not heretics, they were the true heirs of Mars. And though the galaxy believed them exiled, their influence spread like oil through the void. Wherever chaos rose, the Dark Mechanicum's handiwork swiftly followed. They had become what they always saw, the masters of the machine god's entire truth, matter and spirit intertwined in internal, infernal union. Now, I want to talk briefly about the legacy that the Dark Mechanicum has in the 41st millennium. So, Mars was lost. The Horus Heresy ended in the death of the Warmaster, the burning of Terra, and the scattering of the traitors. Yet, the Dark Mechanicum endured. They did not perish in the void of space, nor did they fade into legend. Instead, they transformed. From the Eye of Terror, they rebuilt. Hellforges rose from worlds long abandoned, places where reality itself bent under the weight of heretical will. Here, technology was unbound, logic was twisted, flesh, metal, and demonic essence merged into creations that no loyal Mechanicus or Imperial scholar could comprehend. The Dark Mechanicum became masters not only of what the Imperium feared, but of what it could never even imagine. Their forces produced Daemon Engines, titanic war machines fused with warp energies, and possessing a degree of consciousness entirely alien to human understanding. Vehicles like the Defiler, the Brass Scorpion, and the Harpax Walker were no longer merely tools, they were living extensions of chaos itself. Even the most familiar Imperial weapons were corrupted under their hands. Standard template constructs, once sacred blueprints designed to maintain the safety and sanctity of human technology, were modified, rewritten, and infused with warp energy to become instruments of terror. Artificial intelligence, long forbidden to the loyal Mechanicum, was experimented with without restraint. Machines like the Carbon device blurred the line between sentience and demon. I have to admit, personally, I find the Dark Mechanicum both horrifying and fascinating. The willingness to push the boundaries of machine and flesh is something the Loyalists will never dare to attempt, and in some ways you can't help but admire the sheer audacity of that. That said, and I want to be clear, this is purely my opinion, the cost of that audacity is literally unimaginable suffering. These machines, these creations, often require slave labour, mutation, and sacrifice in ways that are abhorrent, even by the standards of the heresy. The Dark Mechanicum's armies are structured like twisted echoes of the Loyalist Mechanicum. The Dark Skitarii, enhanced and mutated beyond recognition, serve as shock troops. Armies of mutant servitors, often drug-fueled or mechanically augmented, march under the banner of chaos. Demons and possessed constructs are integrated directly into their forces, creating a terrifying synergy between flesh, steel, and warp energies. And then there are, of course, the Titans and Chaos Knights, which we have discussed in previous videos. Even today, the Dark Mechanicum maintains ancient pacts with the traitor Titan legions. These machines, corrupted by the warp and maintained by heretic tech priests, are sentient in ways no Loyalist Titan ever could hope to be. The Dark Mechanicum keeps them functional, not simply as weapons, but as tools of ritual, worship, and dominion. I find this particular aspect deeply unsettling. In my opinion, it is one thing to fight with corrupted machines, it's quite another to worship them as extensions of divine will. There's a philosophical audacity here, and I say that as someone who has studied the Mechanicum at length. The entire worldview that they have, that the machine god is not merely metal and logic, but spirit and warp intertwined, is horrifying if you truly grasp it, yet it's undeniably coherent with their philosophy. In recent millennia, the Dark Mechanicum has expanded its reach. The 13th Black Crusade, led by Abaddon the Despoiler in the aftermath of the Great Rift's creation, saw their forces strike Imperial worlds devastated by war and chaos. But the targets are never random. They seek ancient archaeotech, relics from the Dark Age of technology that will allow them to craft weapons of unimaginable scale and unholy purpose. This is where the Dark Mechanicum truly differs from their Loyalist counterparts. Whereas the Adeptus Mechanicus may hesitate at modifying STCs, fearing the Emperor's judgment or the purity of the machine spirit within, the Dark Mechanicum has no such qualms. Devices like the Silica Animus or the Anima Mori are excavated, studied, and re-engineered, often with demonic components fused directly into their architecture. I have to interject here, purely my opinion, but this is in a way what makes them terrifying beyond the battlefield. They are not bound by ethics, law, or even human life. They view every limitation as a challenge to be overcome. That level of freedom, combined with the sheer intelligence of the Mechanicum, is what makes them arguably one of the most deadly factions in the galaxy, and yet you can't help but marvel, if only slightly, at the inventiveness involved in the things that they create, in the things that they do. It's a very grim admiration, of course, because the cost is always horrendous. Dark Mechanicum technology is inseparable from the warp. They routinely experiment with Daemon Engines, warp-infused vehicles, and sentient war constructs. Even the simplest infantry units may carry devices with subtle warp effects, shields that phase partially into the immaterium, rifles that burn with demonic energy, or servo arms enhanced to unnatural strength by warp-blessed actuators. Their armies often include Hellblades and Helltalons, which are, again, demonic aircraft capable of independently hunting enemies. These flyers are not merely piloted, they are partially sentient, guided by bound entities within their engines. Ground forces are often coordinated by Dark Magi, high-ranking tech priests whose bodies are more machine than flesh, and whose minds are partially tethered to the warp itself. What fascinates me, and again this is my opinion, is the level of experimentation that seems almost reckless. The Dark Mechanicum has no hesitation about gene manipulation, cybernetic augmentation, or binding demons to machines. In my eyes, it's a mixture of brilliance but also, of course, horror. Brilliant for its ingenuity, horrifying for its ethical cost. It's the ultimate manifestation of what happens when faith in the machine god is combined with ambition unbound by morality. Yet, despite all this, the Dark Mechanicum is not merely a collection of experiments. It is a coherent, purposeful force. Forge worlds like Xana 2 and Saranaut and countless others produce weapons, vehicles and engines for Chaos Space Marine warbands, as well as armies entirely under their control. They trade technology, slaves and demonic constructs strategically, ensuring that their influence spreads across the Eye of Terror and even into the fringes of real space. Their ideology, the true Mechanicum, holds that the Emperor is a false god, that the Imperium denies the full spectrum of the machine god's creation, and that the fusion of flesh, machine, and warp essence represents the ultimate evolution of the human mind and the divine machine. In their eyes, loyalist tech priests are blind, denying half of reality. From my perspective, that philosophy is terrifyingly logical. I want to emphasise this is opinion because it's disturbingly coherent. The Dark Mechanicum isn't just chaos for chaos's sake, it's the result of consistent reasoning taken to extremes, coupled with an utter lack of ethical constraint. That combination is rare and extremely dangerous. As the 41st millennium unfolds, the Dark Mechanicum continues to wage its silent war. Their Hellforges never cool, they refine ancient technologies, awaken lost STCs, and merge flesh with machine in ever more horrific configurations. Every world touched by their influence becomes a testament to their vision, a fusion of warp and steel, spirit and circuitry, ambition and damnation. Wherever chaos rises, wherever the Imperium bleeds, the Dark Mechanicum leaves its mark. The universe has never seen a force like this, and if I may speak again from personal observation, I find it almost impossible to overstate their ingenuity here. Not in a heroic sense, of course, they're so amazing, but in sheer technological audacity, they are in fact unparalleled. Yet, as ever, this brilliance is tempered by their horror. Every device, every engine, every demon-bound construct comes at a terrible cost. Lives, flesh, sanity, morality, all are expendable in the pursuit of perfection, power, and heresy. The Dark Mechanicum endures as a force of both awe and terror, a warning to any who would tamper with knowledge, faith, or power. They are the ultimate heretic experiment, a civilization born of ambition, corruption, and the insatiable desire to merge man, machine, and warp into a single infernal whole. Now, let's get into the shadows of war, the modern campaigns and the 13th Black Crusade. Even in the 41st millennium, the Dark Mechanicum does not merely linger in the eye of terror, content to tinker with machines in isolation. No. Their reach extends far, their ambitions as vast as the Imperium itself. Every corner of the galaxy touched by chaos may bear their mark, for they are seekers, hunters, and architects of infernal power. The 13th Black Crusade, launched in the aftermath of the Great Rift's creation, presented the Dark Mechanicum with unprecedented opportunity. Worlds devastated by the warp storms and the collapse of Imperial defences became laboratories, hunting grounds, and crucibles. Here, their armies scoured ruins, excavated lost STCs, and harvested archaeotech from times long forgotten. But let us be clear, the Dark Mechanicum does not strike indiscriminately. Each invasion is calculated, each campaign has purpose. They are searching for technology beyond mere weapons, devices capable of reshaping reality, capable of bending the very law of physics, and capable of merging flesh, machine, and warp into forms of devastating power. And in my opinion, this is what really separates the Dark Mechanicum from other forces of chaos. While Chaos Space Marines often seek war for glory, revenge, or devotion to their gods, the Dark Mechanicum pursues knowledge and innovation with relentless precision. The campaigns are experiments, the victories instruments of research, and every defeat is merely data to be analysed and exploited. From my perspective, that makes them terrifyingly methodical, almost clinical in their approach. It's horrifying, but you have to respect the sheer intellectual audacity of it, as I keep saying. Across devastated worlds, the Dark Mechanicum deploys its armies with brutal efficiency. Dark Skitarii mutated and augmented sweep through ruined cities, supported by mutant servitors and Daemon Engines, as we've discussed before. Artillery, anti-grav vehicles and walker units obliterate fortifications, while Hellblades and Helltalons dominate the skies. Each campaign is a perfect blend of technological precision and demonic unpredictability. The search for ancient archaeotech drives much of their strategy. Items like the Silica Animus, that we've discussed before, capable of warping cognition, or the Anima Mori, which we've also discussed before, whose function remains partially hidden even to their creators, are prime targets. These devices are not merely collected, they are dissected, they are warped and integrated into new systems, often fused with demonic entities. The result is a level of weaponization the Imperium cannot predict nor counter. And yet, despite the infernal nature of their technology, there is structure. The Dark Mechanicum's campaigns are guided by Hierophants and Dark Magi, high-ranking tech priests who coordinate armies, forge constructs, and oversee the integration of warp energies. These leaders are both military commanders and priests of forbidden knowledge, blending strategy with ritual in the ways that the Imperium would call heresy. Personally, I find this combination of discipline and corruption deeply fascinating. It's one thing to build a Daemon engine and quite another to deploy it with precision in a military campaign. Coordinating dozens of warbands and vehicles simultaneously, in my opinion, it reflects a level of sophistication that the Imperium has difficulty matching. Not because they lack numbers, but because the Dark Mechanicum does not play by their rules. The Dark Mechanicum also maintains strong ties with Chaos Space Marine warbands, providing advanced weaponry, Daemon engines, and tactical support. In many cases, their presence is pivotal. A Black Crusade without the Dark Mechanicum is a war without precision, without innovation, without the instruments capable of turning the tide of battle. The Dark Mechanicum's Hellforges are central to these campaigns. Worlds like the before-mentioned Zana II and Saranaut and other hidden Forge worlds churn out weapons, vehicles, and demonically infused constructs. These factories operate without pause, fueled by bound demons, mutant labour, and warp-infused energy cores. They are both production centres and ritualistic hubs, where creation and worship are inseparable. Every artefact produced is a testament to their philosophy. The machine god is not purely material, nor purely spiritual. Flesh, machine, and warp energy coexist in harmony, and the Dark Mechanicum's creations are living embodiments of this principle. The universe itself is a mechanism, and they are its custodians, or its corruptors, depending on one's perspective. Now, I have to be honest here, and again, this is my opinion, but there is a horrifying genius to this worldview. They are methodical, disciplined, and ruthless, but the work is not random. Every action is an experiment, every campaign a test, every new weapon a hypothesis. Ingenious, it's a very dark and destructive form, but still genius nonetheless. From a storytelling perspective, they are probably one of the most fascinating factions in the 41st millennium, precisely because of this combination of intellect and moral abandonment. During the 13th Black Crusade, the Dark Mechanicum's forces struck strategic worlds devastated by the Great Rift. They targeted places with high concentrations of archaeotech, exploiting the Imperium's weakened defences. Fortress cities fell under fire from Daemon Engines, Titans, and war machines infused with warp energies. Entire planetary infrastructures were reconfigured, partially assimilated into new hell forges, or stripped of all valuable resources to fuel further innovation. The Dark Mechanicum's tactical genius lies in their combination of technology and sorcery. Warp-infused engines disrupt enemy communications, while psychic anomalies generated by demonic constructs create chaos in Imperial ranks. Infantry advances are coordinated with precision, synchronised with artillery barrages and airborne attacks. Loyalist defences are overwhelmed not only by raw power, but by psychological warfare, as their machines and soldiers behave in ways that defy comprehension. From my perspective, and I'll admit this is purely opinion, the Dark Mechanicum embodies the ultimate fusion of faith, technology, and ambition. They are terrifying, not just because of the demonic forces that they wield, but because of the clarity of their purpose. They understand the universe differently from the Imperium, and that difference makes them almost impossible to predict. That's what truly terrifies me about them, not the monsters themselves, but the mind behind them. The Dark Mechanicum does not act solely for conquest. They seek artifacts that will allow them to craft devices on the scale of the Dark Age of technology, weapons and engines that could alter reality itself. Their obsession with knowledge is endless, and they treat every battlefield as an opportunity to recover lost secrets, test new constructs, and push the limits of flesh, machine, and demon. They are patient. Every world they attack, every Black Crusade they participate in, is a part of a grand, slow-moving experiment. Imperial victories are temporary setbacks, defeats are lessons, and every encounter enriches their understanding of technology and the warp. They are eternal, unyielding, and cunning beyond most comprehension. Honestly, I think this is one of the most terrifying aspects of the Dark Mechanicum. In my opinion, most of the galaxy measures threats by numbers or firepower, but the Dark Mechanicum operates on the scale of time, knowledge, and inevitability. The persistence, the patience, and the willingness to integrate the warp into technology is something almost entirely alien to human military logic. It's chilling, if I'm being honest. Their influence continues to grow in the 41st millennium. They are central to the operations of traitor legions, supplying Daemon Engines, war machines, and weapons of unimaginable lethality. They experiment with cybernetics, advanced gene splicing, and warp integration in ways that even the loyal Mechanicum considers heretical. Every artifact, every weapon, every demon-infused engine is a testament to their philosophy. Reality is a machine, the warp is a tool, and the Imperium is blind. Their ultimate goal is not merely victory, but mastery. The creation of a universe where machine, demon, and flesh exist in perfect, infernal harmony. And so, in the shadows of the 41st millennium, the Dark Mechanicum endures. They are not simply heretics, they are visionaries, engineers, priests, and destroyers, fused together in a single terrifying doctrine. Their hellforges continue to burn, their demon engines march, and their armies strike wherever the Imperium is weakest. And in my personal opinion, this makes them one of the most fascinating and horrifying forces in the galaxy. They are proof of what happens when knowledge is unbound, when ambition is absolute, and when faith becomes subverted into obsession. To truly understand the Dark Mechanicum, one must look beyond their machines, beyond their armies, and even beyond their heresies. For beneath the smoke, beneath the iron, lies a philosophy, a belief system both ancient and utterly alien to most minds of the Imperium. They call themselves the true Mechanicum, the rightful heirs to the machine god's will. To them, the Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars are imposters, blinded by superstition, enslaved by the corpse emperor, and ignorant of the machine god's true nature. Where the loyalists cling to the Omnisire as a divine figure, the Dark Mechanicum sees the warp itself as part of the great machine. The unseen circuitry of existence, the immaterial component of creation. In their creed, to deny the warp is to deny half of the machine god's being. Matter and spirit, flesh and steel, logic and emotion are all components of the same divine construct. It's a philosophy that drives their experiments, their forges and their wars. Every act of corruption, every demon binding, every mutation is not a desecration in their eyes, but a holy act of revelation. In my opinion, this is one of the most fascinating and disturbing aspects of the Dark Mechanicum, that they're not chaotic in the sense of mindless destruction, that the chaos is structured, it's deliberate, reasoned, and deeply spiritual in its own corrupted way, as I've said. From this perspective, they're not defying the machine god, they're understanding it more completely than the Mechanicus ever could. To the Dark Mechanicum, the loyal tech priests of Mars are prisoners of fear, bound by ancient edicts, crippled by the cult Mechanicus' prohibitions, and shackled to a dogma that forbids true innovation. They see the Mars-based Mechanicus as a stagnant worshipper of a false emperor who claims divinity but denies the truths of the warp. In the forges of the Dark Mechanicum, knowledge is not forbidden, only weakness is. Every discovery is sacred, no matter how horrifying. Every experiment is justified, no matter how many lives it consumes. Their laboratories are filled with machines that breathe, bleed, and whisper prayers to both cog and demon alike. It is said that some dark magi willingly replace their flesh with demonic matter, not merely for augmentation, but for enlightenment. They believe the merger of demon and man reveals truths hidden from mortal understanding. Others replace their minds entirely, merging with warp-born machine spirits until their individuality dissolves into the mechanical consciousness of chaos. They are not content to build, they become their creations. And again, this is my personal take, that's what makes the Dark Mechanicum so haunting. They blur the line between engineer and creation, between priest and god. They're not just building machines, they're trying to transcend humanity through the various things that the Imperium forbids. It's horrifying, yes, but there's a tragic brilliance to it. They are what the Mechanicus could have become if it had ever truly cast off its chains of fear. Their hellforges scattered across the Eyes of Terror and beyond stand as temples to this belief. Each one is unique, a fusion of foundry and shrine, laboratory and battlefield. Within these forges, rituals and production are as one, and they are the same. Every spark of plasma, every strike of the forge hammer, every line of binary prayer is both engineering and invocation. On Zana 2, demon engines are born in rivers of molten steel, their cores screaming as demonic essences abound in data streams. On Saranor, the boundaries between flesh and circuitry blur so completely that the inhabitants cannot be easily categorised as living or mechanical. Other worlds, lost, hidden or unnamed, are rumoured to experiment with sentient data demons, entire consciousnesses of warp energy encoded into digital form. The loyal Mechanicus would call this heresy. The Dark Mechanicum calls it progress. Every creation of the Dark Mechanicum carries a spiritual signature, a fragment of its creator's soul, bound through ritual and data alike. Even their smallest weapons contain echoes of prayer, of belief, of sacrifice. In their own twisted way, they have achieved what the Adeptus Mechanicus always sought: communion between man, machine, and the divine. But that communion comes at a terrible cost. For every machine spirit they awaken, a demon watches. For every discovery they make, a part of their soul is consumed. In my opinion, this is the inevitable end of their philosophy. The more that they embrace the warp, the less human they become. What starts as curiosity becomes addiction. What begins as enlightenment ends in madness. Yet somehow, that's what makes them so compelling. They're not villains in their own eyes, they are seekers of truth, lost in a labyrinth of their own making. The legacy of the Dark Mechanicum is not confined to their hellforges. Their influence spreads like data corruption through the warp. Rogue warbands, isolated forge ships, and even some renegade magi within the Imperium carry fragments of their creed. Each seeks knowledge forbidden by Mars. Each believes that through fusion with the warp they can unlock the machine god's ultimate design. To the Dark Mechanicum, time is irrelevant. They do not measure their success in decades or even centuries. They are patient. The Imperium may rise and fall, stars may burn out, and still the Dark Mechanicum will endure. Hidden within the warp, perfecting their art, waiting for the day when the great machine of the universe reveals its final pattern. And to me, that's what makes them one of the greatest existential threats in the 41st millennium. The Imperium can fight Chaos Space Marines, destroy warbands, even burn worlds. But how do you destroy an idea? How do you kill a philosophy that believes corruption is enlightenment and pain is progress? The Dark Mechanicum doesn't need to conquer the galaxy, it just needs time to learn, time to create, time to evolve. In their view, the universe is a machine. Every atom, every soul, every flicker of warp energy is a cog in the great mechanism of existence. To understand it fully, one must embrace all of its parts: the physical, the spiritual, and the chaotic. The Imperium's refusal to do so is to them the ultimate betrayal of the machine god. And perhaps, in their own twisted way, they are right. For if the universe is a machine, then chaos is its electricity, unpredictable, deadly, and vital. Across millennia, the Dark Mechanicum has not merely survived, it has adapted. It has merged with the warp in ways the Imperium cannot fathom. Each Hellforge is a realm of its own, sustained by demonic energy and powered by heretical genius. They continue to arm the legions of chaos, to rebuild the corrupted titans and knights of old, to shape war itself in their image. They are the shadows of Mars, the echo of every forbidden thought, every silenced experiment, every whisper of what might have been, had the Mechanicum not been tamed by the Emperor's will. And I'll be honest, from a purely thematic point of view, I think that that's what makes them so haunting. They are the embodiment of humanity's potential without restraint. Every time the Mechanicus says no, the Dark Mechanicum says yes. Every forbidden idea, every dangerous experiment, every act of pride or ambition that the Imperium suppresses, the Dark Mechanicum embraces it. They are our reflection in the darkest possible mirror. So as long as the stars burn, so long as machines hum, and so long as mortals crave forbidden knowledge, the Dark Mechanicum will endure. They are not merely a faction, they are a philosophy. They are the shadow that follows enlightenment, the corruption that trails progress, the truth that lies hidden within heresy. The Imperium calls them monsters. They call themselves the future. And in the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps they are both. And that, my friends, has been our dive into the Dark Mechanicum, the forges of corruption, the twisted reflection of Mars itself. Sadly, we've reached that time again where I have to leave you guys, but don't worry, there is plenty more on the way. I've got a lot of ideas cooking in the Manufactorum, and I'm always open to yours. So if there's a topic you'd like to see covered, a faction, a battle, a forgotten piece of lore, drop it down in the comments below. As always, we don't claim to be infallible here, the lore is vast and discussion is half of the fun. So if there's something that you think that I've missed, or that you've got your own interpretation of, or that I've got wrong, I'd love to hear it. Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. It's free, it helps us immensely, and it lets the machine spirit of the algorithm know that you'd like to see more from us. With that, I've been your gracious host, Adeptus Artorum, and I thank you for watching.